Okay, now someone tell me when I'm supposed to stop, because
Go ahead.
ballpark.
Yeah, 9 o'clock.
All right, just wave at me. So I could talk for 3 hours or 35 minutes. So we'll try and stick to the 35 minutes. Okay. Again, feel free to ask any questions as we go through. Don't be polite. Okay, this program is brought to you by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. They fund what we do at BBC. At BBC, we're a small for-profit company based in Ann Arbor. We've been doing this for a long time. Then one of the main things that we do is SBIR and STTR research grant assistance. And we're funded by the state of Michigan to help Michigan small businesses. Okay, so I'll talk about the program, how you can get into it, how you can get our help at the end of the presentation. So hang in there. But essentially, our services to Michigan companies are almost free. Okay, this is a unique program in the US. No other states offer this. In fact, other states give businesses $4,000 or whatever, and then they hire BBC. So, but you guys get it for almost nothing. Almost nothing. Yes?
Can you landscape what this SPR in this valley of death analogy, where that...
Absolutely. I absolutely will. I hope. If I don't, at the end, ask me to do it better, okay? So that's my hope as we go through here, that I'll help you to understand that a little bit more. So why are you here? Investigating new sources of grant funding. We all need new sources of grant funding. I was an academic for 18 years or so. That was what I thought about when I got up in the morning and when I went to bed at night. Pursuing applied research. You're tired of all that boring R01 stuff. You want to do something useful? That's a joke. Commercializing your research discoveries. Investigating career opportunities for grad students and postdocs. Considering starting a company. That's always fun. Or someone told you to come. There's always some people here who were told, come to this. So in the next 35-ish minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SBIR program. I'm going to introduce you to it. We're going to talk about who's eligible and who's not. Also, we're not just going to talk about the National Institutes of Health, although that will be the main focus, obviously, because of the audience here today. But there are other funding agencies that could possibly fund what it is that you do. How to participate. There's a word missing there in the SBIR program. You don't just need to start a company. There's other ways that faculty can be involved and can get involved. Maybe you want to start at the smaller levels before you leap in and start your own company. How to succeed at SBIR, STTR. That's what everybody wants to know. And how you can get help from us. That's what I'll cover at the end. So one of the things, I love coming to university. I was an academic for many years in the UK and then at Michigan State. It's not just about your cool science. Cool science is great, but there is a lot of cool science out there that will never start a company. We see a lot of academics come to us, and I would rather work with an academic than a pure entrepreneur any day. But who come to us and say, I've been successful for years with my R01s. The NIH is going to love this. And I've seen many of those people kind of crash and burn at SBIR, STTR because they're trying to write more R01s. It's about more than the science. It's about things that we'll talk about as we go through. So how much money is there? $2.6 billion a year. So I was recently a speaker at a workshop across the state in Grand Rapids, and there were 300 people at this conference, and there were 2 concurrent sessions. I was leading the session on SBIR and STTR funding. Next door, a gentleman was leading a session on crowdfunding. He had 297 people, and I had 3. Okay, so I said next time, and we could barely hear ourselves think because people were like cheering in the room next door. Next time, title my session "How to Get $2.6 billion from the federal government," because then people will show up. Anyway, there is $2.6 billion. It's federal money. What do these letters mean? SBIR is Small Business Innovation Research. STTR is Small Business Technology Transfer. Why do we care of these? How are they different? I'll talk about that in a few moments, and I'd be happy to answer questions because it is particularly important for academics. So what's the program there for? It's to stimulate technological innovation in the private sector, to strengthen the role of small business in meeting federal R&D needs, and to increase the commercial application of federally funded research. Obviously, there is a lot of federally funded research out there in the universities, in the research institutions, but we want to get it out there. It is not an alternative way of funding your lab. Okay, this is something that we advise academics all the time. Yes, it is a way of getting funding into your lab, but it's not supposed to be just that, and reviewers see that very clearly when a proposal is written, and that's its goal. So it is about starting companies, it is about stimulating small businesses. It's mandated by legislation. It's there until 2017. It's not going away. It's been there since the 1980s. Most people love this program. It's very popular. Politically, some people argue about the details, but essentially everybody loves this program. It applies to 11 federal agencies. SBIR and STTR applies to 5 federal agencies. Essentially, every federal agency that has an extramural research budget must set aside part of its budget to this program. So they have no choice. Whether they want to participate or not, they have to. And it's managed by the Small Business Administration. They make the rules, they enforce the rules. And there are rules, and you do need to follow them. It's federal money, so it's important to follow the rules. So SBIR versus STTR, what's the difference? It's all about the relationship with non-profit research institutions. Now, in any SBIR or STTR, it's always the small business that is the applicant organization. It's never the university that applies. It is not the university's grant. It's the small business's grant. But in an SBIR, you're allowed to collaborate. If you're a small business, you can collaborate with a non-profit research institution, with a university. You can, but you don't have to. If you can do everything in-house, you do not need to take it outside. In an STTR, you must collaborate with a non-profit research institution, and that institution must do a proportion of the work. And I'll talk about those percentages just a little bit in a minute. So who has the money? Of this $2.6 billion, who has it? Well, not surprisingly, the Department of Defense has half of it. So 50% of this money sits in the Department of Defense. The next biggest piece of the pie belongs to Health and Human Services, which includes obviously the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, and a smaller agency whose name I forget, something to do with children and families. But essentially, that's the next biggest piece of the pie. NASA comes next, energy, NSF, pretty small, and then all the others we lump into that other 3%. There would be USDA, transport, EPA, commerce, and education, and homeland security. You'll see some of these have SBIR and STTR. The smaller ones only have SBIR, not the STTR as well. Here we go. Here's the Valley of Death. We've already seen it. The chasm of death, the canyon of death, whatever it is. How to get your research into a product when you run out of money. Your great idea is developed, but you have no money to take that further. And we've had clients who come to us and say, basically, NIH won't fund my research anymore. They say, I have to do an SBIR. You know, that we've got to the end of our R01s now. They want me to do an SBIR. Can you help? You're going to need to get across that gap somehow. It's great that University of Michigan has so many resources to help you. SBIR is perfect for this. Okay, there are other things you need, criteria you need to meet, but SBIR is almost the way to walk you across here. It's the bridge that can help you. So if you come up with a great idea and you want to start a company, you want to fund what you're doing, there are various ways you can get money. You can go to the bank. You can borrow money. Who do you borrow money from? You know, friends, family, fools, whoever it is. You can borrow money, but eventually, what's going to happen? You're going to have to pay it back, okay? Sometimes with some interest. That is going to happen. Equity, okay? You can have people invest in your company. And in the old days, whenever, 10 years ago, whatever, we'd have companies come to us and say, I don't need SBIR, I'm just going to get investment into my company. And maybe that was possible then. It's a lot tougher now with the way that things are, you know, and tougher in Michigan to get people to invest in your company, especially if it's very early stage. We in no way discourage getting investment into your company. And sometimes there's an academic mindset, which is, it's mine. I don't want investment because you know, I want to hold on to this technology. And a lot of academics will hold on to technology very, very tightly, and it will never get anywhere. At some stage, most companies, especially in the life sciences, are going to need some kind of investment and people coming to bring their expertise as well as their money into your company. Okay, so that's another thing. But then they are diluting your stock. They are diluting your ownership of your company when they do that, and they have some control. You may not want that at an early stage. It may be hard to get. So this is the holy grail of company funding. It's non-dilutive funding. Doesn't dilute your company's assets in any way. You don't have to pay it back. As we call it, it's free money. Okay, you will pay a price for it, trust me, but in blood, sweat, and tears, but it's non-dilutive money. No one is asking you to pay it back. People often come and say, can you tell me what other grants are out there for small companies? Very few. Very, very few. SBIR is one of the only granting mechanisms for small businesses. There are a lot of granting mechanisms for not-for-profits, but very few for for-profit companies. So what does it fund? It funds product development. You must have a product. I was reviewing a grant yesterday, and it's amazing. You can get through an entire proposal and go, I have no idea what these people are trying to sell. Okay, what is your product? It must be based on technological innovation. One of the things that we try and help our clients do is explain why what they're doing is innovative and describing that technology and why it's novel. You must also have a credible commercialization strategy. Okay, you must know how you're going to sell your thing. Okay, here again you have a lot of resources, people you can go to who can help you put this together. If you are developing a drug, a therapeutic, there is pretty much only one commercialization strategy out there: licensing, partnerships. Although we've seen people come up with very creative ones that would never work. But anyway, you must have a commercialization strategy. You must have thought it out. And when you're putting your proposal in, it is not an R01. It has the business and the commercialization aspects to it. So, anyone know what this is? Pillow pet. Okay. Anybody who knows a child between the ages of 4 and 15 has probably seen a pillow pet. Okay. It's a pillow. It's a pet. It's a pillow. It's a pet. Not a lot of technological innovation. In fact, the technological innovation is a piece of Velcro that turns it from, a pillow into a pet. Does it have technological innovation? No. Does it have commercial potential? Absolutely. I have a house full of these things. We have little penguins, big penguins, pterodactyls, tortoises, you name it, we have these things. Okay, people come to us, they have a great thing. Sometimes we have to send them away and say, I'm sorry, you could be very successful. You could make several zillion dollars on this. I wish I'd thought of it, but it is not an SBIR. There is not enough technological innovation in it. You must be developing a product. When you're putting your proposal in, you have to understand what that product is. Sometimes it's a product and a service. Sometimes it's a service. Sometimes it's linked. You have to know what it's going to be used for, who's going to use it. You have to describe clearly what you've done to date. What are you bringing to the table? What data have you already developed? And how much is left to do? And you can come into SBIR at many, many stages in terms of how much you've already done and how much there is left to do. Where you don't want to be is the tweaking phase, okay? Because it's about technological innovation, so there still has to be enough technology to develop for it to fit this mechanism. If you're already done, maybe you're selling some things, but you're just trying to fix stuff, you may be too late for SBIR. Technology in search of a problem. We don't know why we make these things, so we're hoping to find people who don't know why they buy them. So this, unfortunately, sometimes people have great things. They have great platform technologies. They have awesome widgets, gadgets, whatever. And when you say, well, what problem is this going to solve? Who's going to buy this? Sometimes you get the answer, well, there's a professor down the hall who says this will be very useful for X. Okay, so you have a market of one. Obviously, these kind of technologies where you develop something cool and then you're trying to work out how to use it, sometimes you can do that. But more typically, it's solving a problem. So sometimes the most interesting people I find to work with are surgeons, doctors who are out there, they find a problem, they solve it, and then they're developing a product that I find to be very interesting to work with. So commercialization is the ability to provide a solution to a problem in exchange for money. People have to be willing to pay you for this solution, right? And it has to be an important problem for that to be the case. And you also have to have a business model that hangs together and that makes some sense. Again, at the beginning, when you put your first grant in, that can be very sketchy. It can be very vague. But we'll talk about SBIR phases in a minute. Pretty soon, you're going to have to come up with something a little bit tighter than that and a little more detailed. Fortunately, there are resources here and around the state that can help you to do that. You're not on your own. So we call this the build it and they will come business model. Not a very effective one. You need to do a little bit of background research before you launch into doing something. So how does it work? What does an SBIR project look like? Typically, you need to think of it as a 2.5 to 3 year project, typically around 3 years, but it's broken into phases. The first phase is always a feasibility study, a proof of concept study, typically 6 months to 1 year, with a budget of between $100,000 and $200,000. So it's a small initial study. And at the end of that, you will be required to present data to show the reviewers for your phase 2 proposal, look, we did it. Here's our proof of concept. Here's the data that shows this is going to work. Now give me the big bucks, please. Okay, and then the phase 2, the big bucks, is another 2 years and typically around $1 million. Now, some agencies have extra money on top of that. So if you're developing a device or a therapeutic, you can sometimes get add-on money at the end of phase 2 that will take you out for another 2 to 3 years with $1 million a year. So these can be pretty substantial projects. Phase 3 is kind of the cheap phase here. It doesn't really exist in terms of no one is giving you money to do that, or rather the federal government is not giving you money to do that. So this is where you're going to need other money. SBIR money is only R&D. You can't use it for anything but R&D. Yes?
At the end of that 2.5-year cycle, where do the agencies expect you to be?
They don't. Well, so
You're done at that point?
the granting agencies, so the NIH, the NSF, the USDA, they give you the money, you do what you can, you write your report. The contracting agencies like NASA, the Department of Defense, typically have deliverables and stages they will ask you to get to. So the DoD in its solicitations will have very clear, by the end of phase 1 we expect to see this, by the end of phase 2 a working prototype, and those kind of things. But there's no holding you to that. If you fail, you fail, and that's unfortunate. You won't get more money for that, but there's no consequences in that sense. But for a therapeutic, say, if you're coming in here with a lead compound, you could be doing like in vitro work, you could be doing toxicology at any point along this. So if idea is here and commercialization is here, an SBIR could be anywhere along that pipeline. And obviously for an IT project, your pipeline is going to be short. For a therapeutic or a device, it's going to be longer. So this kind of summarizes what I just said. Feasibility study, phase 1. R&D, phase 2. Phase 3, you're pretty much on your own. Some agencies will give you a little bit of extra money. There are rules to follow. Okay, these slides, you can put anything on these slides, it's great. So there are some rules you have to follow. You have to have a small business. Number one, you have to have a business to enter this process. So you have to have started a small business. It has to be US owned and controlled primarily, so actually over 50% owned and controlled by US citizens or permanent residents. You must have under 500 employees. So a company with 499 employees is still a small business. Must be for profit. Must be located in the United States. All of the work must be done in the United States. And the company must have company-controlled research space. Here's the one where everyone starts tripping over themselves. You have to have research space in which you're doing work. Unless you look good in an orange jumpsuit, you really want to try and follow these rules. It's federal funding. And if you make a mistake at the university, I could be wrong here, the buck kind of stops with the universities at some point. But when you're in a small business and you're in charge, the buck stops with you. So we try and make sure that our clients are not breaking the rules and making sure they're following things. And some of them can be kind of difficult to understand. So not only do you have to have a company, you have to have some space. You have to have research space. You cannot do this in your lab at the university. You have to have some space. And obviously, there are places where you can rent space. You don't have to own it. If you're an IT company, that space might be a cubicle at Spark. But if you're a drug development company or a device company, it has to be some kind of space where you can do the work. You don't have to have it when you put your grant in, but you have to tell the reviewers that you're going to get it, where you're going to get it if possible, and describe those facilities. Because the reviewers are going to look at the whole picture, not just your research strategy, but where you're going to do the work, who you're working with, and those kind of things. Yeah?
But that's for the company-performed portion of the research.
Yes.
Not for the university-performed research.
Right.
Portion, the percentage of the research, like in the...
Sure. So you can subcontract to the university to have some work done in the university, but you must still have your own space where something is being done. It may be small, it may be, you may have to do all the big stuff in the university, but you still have to have somewhere. And so when you get to a phase 2 and you've got $1 million, you have to spend at least half of that in the company. And if you have no space, you're going to be struggling to do that. So again, if you're an IT company, you could do your work in Starbucks. You've got Wi-Fi, round-the-clock coffee, right? But it's not company-controlled space. No one's giving you a key. You can't get in all hours. There's no private space in there. So you are going to need at some point to get those facilities and have those. So just again, SBIR, you are allowed to collaborate. STTR, you're required to collaborate with the university. There's a little bit more money in SBIR than there is in STTR. In fact, quite considerably, like almost 10 times more money in the pot. However, there are almost 10 times less applications to STTR. So the reality is that the success rates for these mechanisms are almost identical. But there are some rules that make STTR very appealing for academics. So in an SBIR, the principal investigator of an SBIR must be at least 50% employed by the small business. And that's not effort, that's employment status, but it means that if you have a full-time position or full-time job somewhere else, you cannot be the PI of an SBIR without taking a leave of absence, reducing your effort at the university, or whatever. So this makes it very hard for somebody at a university to be the PI on an SBIR. At an STTR, the PI is allowed to remain in their institutional position. So faculty can stay in their position at the university, and the company subcontracts them to do part of the work. And the PI doesn't have to leave their position. So this is a very attractive option. The other thing is that in an SBIR, you're only allowed to outsource about 30% of the work in a phase 1, whereas in an STTR, you can outsource 60% of the work. The company has to do 40. The other 60% can be spent at the university and with any other collaborators. So again, if you're a startup with very kind of minimal facilities and equipment, this can be very appealing because you can do a good chunk of the work at the university. So that would be pretty much why people take this route. Obviously, working in the university, check conflict of interest issues, check IP, go to tech transfer, discuss with them everything that you've already heard this evening. Conflict of interest, every single institution that I have ever come across has a very different policy on what is conflict of interest and what you're allowed to do. The University of Michigan is pretty great as far as I can see. University of Pittsburgh, not so much. I mention them because we work in Pittsburgh quite a lot, and we often have faculty who come and say, I'm the chair of my department, I do this, everyone loves me, it's going to be fine. A week before the deadline, they say, my university won't sign off on this. So that can be a problem. Yeah.
You mentioned OTT. Does the applicant always have to hold at least an option on any associated intellectual property in order to have a real chance at
So for a phase 1 SBIR, honestly, all you pretty much have to say is, we are in discussion with licensing the intellectual property. In a phase 1, it can be very loose, it can be very provisional, we're discussing this, whatever. By the time you get to a phase 2, you're going to have a better plan to show the reviewers that if this works, you're going to be able to develop this into a product that you can sell. So how involved do you want to be? Are you going to give up your day job and start a company? I'm not going to advise you either way. It's kind of risky. But anyway, so there are various ways, though, that you can be involved in an SBIR and STTR. Okay, risk, reward. You can be a consultant. Faculty can consult on SBIRs and STTRs. That's completely fine. You can be a subcontractor. So the small business is here. They're paying you to do part of the work as a sponsored research agreement through the university. You could be an employee, obviously, of the small business. You can found a small business and then pretty much have nothing else to do with it. You can put other employees in to do the work. You can subcontract to the university to do parts of it, but actually not do any of the hands-on work yourself. Or you can take the whole risk and be the entrepreneur, start the business, leave your job, and go that way. We've seen every combination, and that's pretty much just describing that. So there are different roles in addition to just starting a company yourself. So very, very quickly, all of these 11 federal agencies we talked about, the National Institutes of Health does not operate in the same way as the Department of Defense, as you might guess. These agencies are all kind of governed by the SBA and the way they work this program, but there are differences in terms of whether you get a grant or a contract, how proposals are reviewed, obviously the topics that they're requested, how much money you're given, the success rates, etc., etc. Very different. So there is a little homework that you need to do to discover where it is you want to be and where you want to get some funding from. One of the websites we recommend is eyn.com/SBIR. This website has a lot of resources on SBIR, but the most useful thing it has up here is actually a searchable database. And you can search closed SBIR topics. This is the best way to see kind of historical background. What topics have been released? What kind of things have been funded by SBIR in the past? That'll help you to have an idea where your project might fit. So one of the things that we do stress to our life sciences clients is NIH is not your only potential home. So obviously the NSF funds life science. That's pretty straightforward. The Department of Defense, one of the biggest funders of breast cancer research. Any medical device that can be used in the field. An extraordinary number of life science projects are funded through the Department of Defense. USDA, rural health, comes under there. Health education comes under the Department of Education. NASA puts people in space, so it funds a lot of life science, and obviously NIH. I mean, NIH, probably the place to start, but don't dismiss some of these other opportunities. We know about NIH, what it's there for. When we talk to clients, we try and encourage them to address the mission of the institute they're writing for, obviously. You probably know about NIH, organized into 27 separate centers that many of you have probably already worked with. Each has its own SBIR, STTR program directors that you would speak to. And each of these obviously has its own research area that funds what it is that you're doing. I'm sure this is similar along other research mechanisms. So that money is split up between the institutes. The biggest, National Cancer Institute, Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Nursing research gets a tiny, tiny piece of the pie. But interestingly, I think BBC has a 100% success rate on projects to the National Institute of Nursing Research. I don't know why. Maybe they don't get many good projects. But even though it's the smallest piece of the pie, you can still be successful. I don't know what R01 success rates are looking like these days, but SBIRs, 15%, 20%. By the time you get to a phase 2, your success rates are up in the 30, 40, 50%. Pretty high compared to most research mechanisms. We encourage companies to go this route. The NIH does things in a very a very helpful way. It has one solicitation a year. It's called the NIH SBIR STTR Omnibus Solicitation. It opens in January. It closes in December. It has 3 deadlines, April, August, December. You can submit at any of those. It's investigator-initiated. Any topic you can think of that is health-related, that fits within NIH, you can submit to the NIH at any time. You do not have to look for a topic or find a topic. If it's health-related, you can submit it. National Science Foundation, still a granting agency, has 2 deadlines a year, June and December, for SBIR and STTR. It has topic areas, but they're extraordinarily broad. So last cycle, it had actually 9 topic areas. I've challenged everybody in trainings I've done across the country to find a research area that doesn't fit within one of these broad topics. And they're very broad, and in each of these topics, although they will break them down, they'll always say, or something like this, or an idea in this area. Come up with something, very broad topics. Department of Defense, very different. The Department of Defense knows what it wants. It asks for it very specifically, and you are expected to deliver exactly what they're asking for with their milestones and deliverables. And their topics are very, very specific. Navy, Army, Air Force have the biggest piece of the pie. And again, each of these has a slightly different way of doing things. Education, health education, telehealth, those kind of issues can fit there. And that was very, very quick through the agencies. Any questions? Okay. Stunned into silence. You have to have a project. Oh, question, yes.
So, do you have to go through the process consecutively? Go, for example, apply for a phase 2 grant with the concept that you know, outside of the STTR program?
So, 6 months ago, I would say, no, 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 you cannot do that. But the NIH has just brought in a brand new pilot solicitation called a direct to phase 2. So if you already have good proof of concept data, you can now submit to this direct to phase 2 solicitation. You'll be presenting that data as if it were a phase 1 proof of concept study and move straight into the phase 2. But at that point, you're going to be judged on your commercialization strategy, your business plan, your company, your facilities, your board of directors. And typically people who've done that all in the university don't have that other stuff quite in place yet. So you're not just graded on the research, you're going to be graded on what else you have in place. So for most university spin-outs, that's not necessarily the best way to go. If you've already got a company, it has people and space, it may be. Yep.
If you're writing a NIH grant, are there programmatic differences between the different program areas within the NIH that you should be aware of?
In terms of the different institutes?
Yeah, or what they might have for offering, phase 1, fast tracks, direct to phase 2.
So the Omnibus solicitation is the Omnibus. So it is the same, has the same requirements across all those institutes. Sometimes there are special solicitations with special money, special timing that you can find in addition to the Omnibus. But the Omnibus is the same. But on the other hand, like the National Cancer Institute sometimes has some quirky rules and things it likes more than others. So at every step in the process, we encourage you to speak to the NIH, and they encourage you to contact them, which I understand is not quite the same as in other mechanisms, but to have dialogue with them before you submit to find out what those things might be.
But that direct to phase 2, which I have never heard of before, and I think is very appropriate for some of our technologies. That's for anything with any NIH agency, correct?
Yes, it's really new. It started in April, maybe it was December. So we haven't yet seen the fallout from that. A lot of the companies who wanted to submit, in our opinion, weren't terribly ready for it. But everybody wants to submit a phase 2, because who would want to do a phase 1 if you could go straight to a phase 2 with $1 million? But yeah, I mean, it can be very, very valuable for those companies that already have a good amount of data.
Contract process.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the company has to be there. Really, at that point, they would be looking for facilities, for people, for stuff being done in the company, not just in the university. So if you're a good, solid company that's already doing something, then they could definitely be eligible. And people are very excited about that mechanism. So just when we think NIH is, they bring in something new. And okay, you have to have innovation, you have to have commercial potential, you have to have a company, it has to be eligible, you have to have a qualified PI. If you don't have one, you're going to have to find one. And if you're doing an SBIR, that person has to be employed by the company. So you have to think about that and how that's going to work. If you're doing an STTR, you're going to have to work out who's going to be in the company if the PI is in the university, because you still have to do work in the company. So who's going there? Your best qualified postdoc while the professor's staying in the university, whatever way that can work. You must have a team. These are not single-person grants. They're teams. You're going to have collaborators, you're going to have consultants, and a good team, and you're going to have facilities to do the work. Why would you do this? Well, it's kind of obvious, really, the money, I guess. So since 2002, through the program at BBC, we've seen over $120 million awarded to Michigan companies through this program. These are just companies that have come through BBC training and assistance. And some of these, I'm sure you'll recognize some of these names. Compendia Bioscience came to us familiar to anybody? A few years ago, and they wanted to do a fast track, which is a lump together for phase 1 and phase 2. And I said, no way, we don't encourage fast tracks. They're a bad idea. But we'll work with you. They were determined, and they were awesome, and they worked hard, and they got their first fast track funded and their second fast track funded, and they raked in the millions from SBIR. Very, very successful. NeuroNexus, I'm sure you've also heard of. Hygieia, also another University of Michigan spin-out, doing very well. Advita is a recent spin-out from Wayne State University. They've just got a phase 1, a phase 2, and a fast track, so they're on the $3.54 million now, I think, on this. The Play Project, completely different. This is a project run by a doctor in the south of Ann Arbor who runs a clinic for children with autism. He developed a training system to train parents to work with their children. Typical systems train medical professionals to work with these children. This is a completely new paradigm where parents are working with their kids. Extraordinarily successful phase 1, phase 2, and now they're doing an add-on to that phase 2. My favorite, my baby, Backyard Brains. I don't know if anyone's heard of Backyard Brains and Tim Marzullo. So Tim came to us. He's given me permission to share this story a few years ago, and he put in an SBIR without our help. He didn't know we existed, and it was trashed. It was torn to shreds. I looked at the reviews, and I said, Tim, you know what? It's just not an SBIR. It's training, it's education, it's just not what SBIR does. Tim has a device that teaches kids, basically, it's an educational tool to teach children about neurophysiology, about neuroscience. Basically, they put electrodes on a cockroach, they make that cockroach move around, they do stuff with it, and it teaches kids about neuroscience. Okay, I said, Tim, you know what? This is awesome. He's an Ann Arbor guy, he's very quirky, came out of NeuroNexus. Very quirky Ann Arbor guy who loves what he does and has a great passion for what he does. I said, I'm sorry, you know what? I don't know what I can say. 3 weeks later, I'm going through the special solicitations at the NIH, and apparently somebody had noticed that very few people are going into the neuroscience field these days. So what the NIH decided was a solution to that was to put out a special solicitation for new training techniques, new educational tools for children in neuroscience. Really, what are the chances? And that was a $600,000 phase 1. So huge amounts of money for that. And then they got a successful phase 2. They're international now, doing very, very well, doing what they love. If you can get him to share those summary statements with you, they're some of the funniest I have ever read, because every single reviewer just went, ew, that's disgusting. But children love it. They absolutely love it. They've also attracted the ire of PETA. Apparently there are, because they think we're being mean to cockroaches, and so they're not very happy with them. But apparently there are no regulations on what you can do to cockroaches. So yeah, they check in, but they never check out. Anyway, so what do we do if you okay, I'm going over time here. So what do we do? So we're here to help Michigan companies through this process. It can be daunting. For those of you who've written R01s, it's a little less daunting. For people who've never seen these written a real rigorous proposal before, this is a terrifying process. Anyway, our goals are to increase the number of applications, to increase their quality. We do that by training, one-on-one proposal assistance, and outreach. So we come and tell you guys that we're here. We train you. We will critique you into the ground on your proposals with one-on-one coaching and assistance. Sometimes the more academic types find this kind of painful, but it's good. It's a back and forth. It's an iterative process. You send us your grants. I review them. We send them back. We discuss them. We come to an agreement. We yell a bit. We shout a bit. And then we get the best proposal we can from that creative process. We have trainings. We do this kind of thing. We do a 101, which is a half-day training, like a 3-hour training. We do agency-specific training. So the NIH is actually a day and a half now. It's not 2 days anymore. So you'd have to sit with me in a room for a day and a half. We usually provide good food and a lot of coffee to go through the basics of NIH, how your proposals are reviewed, who reviews them. We go through proposal prep. We go through electronic submission, which is a nightmare. How to get your proposal. Those wonderful people in the grants office who do this for you, buy them cookies, take them out to lunch. Because when you're a company, you have to do this yourself, and you'll realize how unpleasant it is. So we train you how to do that. And there's 1 day for NSF, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense. We also run a whole bunch of other webinars that are online. They're live, or you can buy them recorded. So we do all that. To be eligible, you have to have a company. You have to be in Michigan. You have to have a qualified PI. We won't send you away if you don't have these things, but we'll advise you that you need to get them and help you to get them as much as we can. You must have sufficient time prior to the deadline. That is not 10 days before a deadline. These grants take 3-4 months from beginning discussion to getting this thing written and submitted. So I don't think we've yet turned people away, although we've threatened to do it. But there's not much we can do with a week before a deadline. We'll try, but there's not really much we can do. So I said it was almost free. There's a $500 upfront fee to enter the program. And that's because people need some skin in the game, honestly. It turns away people who really are not going to be achieving anything, who probably shouldn't be in the program. But I think we do have some assistance for people who really cannot pay this, but it's a pretty minimal fee, I think. And with that, you get free training, free webinars. Everything else is completely free. All the assistance, all the coaching, everything else. No one's going to come and ask you for money. This is our website. If you go to the website, at the bottom of the page, there's a menu that'll take you to our assessment form, the SBIR STTR assessment form. If you click there and you fill in your details and send that to us, I will send you an email and say, would you like to come in and talk with us? Would you like to speak on the phone? We can talk through your ideas. Or you can just call. I'll probably send you to the assessment form so we get some background on you. But we would love to hear from you with any ideas that you have. There's also other matching money that you can get for these programs, whether you're life sciences or energy or other technologies, and that's available in the state through the MEDC programs too. My number one piece of advice, every January we write a newsletter, and we're asked, what is our number one piece of advice for people writing grants? And Calvin and Hobbes, always there. Last minute panic, not an effective strategy. Okay. A little bit over 35 minutes. I'd be happy to answer questions. I'd be happy to answer any emails that you want to send to me after this time too, but I have nowhere to rush off to right now. So yes.
Can you go through the timing for fast track funding? Does it come all at once? Is it tranched?
Nothing comes at once. Okay, nothing comes at once. It's not like university money. When it comes to the company, it doesn't even come to you in that sense. You basically you have an account at NIH. When you spend money, you get money. When you spend money, you get money. So no one is dumping money into your account at any point. And that is a good thing, because otherwise you'd have to pay tax on $1 million when it came into your account and sat there. So the only difference between the fast track and the phase 1, phase 2 is that little gap in the middle. That's another little valley of death, because you do the phase 1, you get the data, you submit a phase 2 proposal, and then you have to sit through the NIH's review process, which takes a few months.
Could you talk a little bit about timing between when you submit, when you receive your first funding, when you resubmit, when you receive your first?
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
Bad news.
The bad news. The bad news is it takes a very long time. So the deadline of August just passed. August 5th was the deadline. So reviews, obviously they go in, they're assigned for review. People will get their scores, their summary statements by November. So by November, they'll get a score, and they'll have an idea. So, if you get a score of 15, you're jumping up and down, great. This is just the NIH, obviously. You're pretty sure you're going to be funded with an SBIR with a 15. If you get a 20, you're pretty happy, but you're not sure. If you get a 40, you don't know. You could be, you might not be. It depends on so many other factors. And then the NIH has to meet, they have to discuss it. Then you have to jump through hoops to provide them with paperwork, to prove that you have facilities, to show you have the people you said you'd have, and those kind of things. So 9 months to a year, from submission to money in your hand. Well, not in your hand, but available.
The same gap when you resubmit for phase 2?
Yes. So you need to get your act in gear and write your phase 2 the minute you start your phase 1. And then all you need to slot in is the phase 1 results. But by that point, hopefully, you've got some matching money, you've got some other money that can kind of tide you over that gap to be doing other things. So you're not doing what some companies do, which is basically lay off all their staff and hire them again and lay off all their staff when they are just dependent on SBIR.
Now, I think I heard you say you don't recommend the fast track.
So for most people, it isn't appropriate. If you're just starting out of the university, it's probably not appropriate because you're putting in a 12-page commercialization strategy. You know, how many people in a brand new startup have a 12-page commercialization strategy with your business plan, your funding, stream, your revenue stream, all those kind of things together, your board of directors. If you have and facilities and people doing work.
But if you were collaborating with an existing company.
Right, that would be okay.
Okay.
Yes. But it's a higher bar. So when you go in with a phase 1, you're saying, give me $200,000, I'll show you I can do this. Right? If you put in a fast track, you're basically saying, give me $1 million, trust me, I can do this, without very much to show them that you can do that. Yeah. But if you have a lot, if you already have some stuff, typically we say if you haven't commercialized something, if you don't have facilities, if you don't have people, don't even think about it. It's more important to get in the door and get that phase 1 than do all the work for a fast track and then fail.
All right, thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.